wouldn't call this job simple, but I wouldn't call it real difficult either. The best advice I can give you is to do it the way and in order that I'm explaining in this video, and it can save you a whole lot of time and trouble and redoing things, and just, it'll keep you from wasting your time, and that's kind of should be the agenda of YouTube videos. There's a little bit to know, and the first thing you always want to do, especially when working with anything electrical, is to disconnect the battery. Once the battery is disconnected, your focus should go on the passenger side of the engine bay and just locate the alternator, which is right there. And that I'm pointing to is the EGR valve. And the alternator does not fall down below the engine bay. It has to come out toward the hood. And in order to get it straight out without any problems, you have to remove this EGR valve. Here's a still picture of the EGR valve, and the first thing you want to do is disconnect this top wiring harness. And this is done by pushing this little red clip to the right. It doesn't have to come all the way out. You should hear it click into the unlocking position about halfway through, and at that point that wiring harness should just pull right out of there. And personally, I don't like this system because those little red clips, especially in the winter time, tend to harden up and they break when you try to disconnect them and get them into the unlocking position. But either way, this has to be disconnected, and then you can proceed to disconnecting the wires to the alternator and removing this valve. The tube going into the EGR valve is connected with 8mm bolts, and just get them off, and underneath that tube you'll see a thin little gasket. You need to save that. These are reusable, but sometimes they break, and if they break you're going to have to go out and get another gasket. Now, on the side of this valve you have two 10mm bolts. One's at the top and one's at the bottom. Both of them are going into the cylinder head. And the bottom one can be a little bit tricky to get a hold of and to get out, because on some models and on some aftermarket alternators, when you pull that bolt out, you can't get it all the way out because it hits the alternator. If that's your case, you're going to have to take the belt off and loosen up the alternator in order to move it out of the way a little bit so you can get at that bolt and get it all the way out. And here I'm showing you that I'm using a 1/4-inch drive, and that's because I can get a small socket and small extension to it. If you use a 3/8 drive or anything bigger, the socket and the extension might be too thick to reach that bolt. And the metal gasket that goes in between this and the head did not come off with the valve, so it stayed on the head, and we need to get that off and put it aside so we don't lose it. And now you can see we have plenty of room, and we need to take that alternator wire off, and I believe that's either a 1/2 inch or 13mm. Now there's three 15mm bolts holding this alternator in, and you can clearly see that one right there. There's also one underneath, and the third one is in an odd place, and I'll show you where that is in a minute. Now, before you start loosening up that alternator, we need to get up under the car and we need to take the belt off the pulleys and get some slack in there. Now, you don't have to take the belt all the way off unless, of course, you're changing your belt. So you just need to get the belt off one of the pulleys. I usually take it off the power steering or the alternator itself, and I'll show you how this is done in a minute. Now I should take off this front wheel, and I highly recommend taking off that, passenger side wheel, and it'll give you a little bit more access. For now, just jack it up and put it on a jack stand. And before we get to the pulleys and the belt and the alternator itself, we need to take this rock shield off, and I'll show you what I'm talking about in a second. And if we squeeze on up there, this is the rock shield I was referring to. They're just held in by those push pin things. This one has a couple zip ties on it and the push pins too. Because once you take these off, they're usually stripped, and you should go out and buy some more of those. I'll show you what that is in a second. You can see there's a zip tie there. There's another one on here somewhere. And then there's two push pins at the top. It's also got a nut and bolt on it in there. Yeah. So I gotta take that nut and bolt off. I gotta pop these zip ties off, and then you just yank it down. And they're pretty easy to get out. It's no big deal. And now we can actually see and work back there. If you take a look around, you can see the belt going around, all the pulleys everything is on this car. All the belts ride on the outside except for the idler and the tensioner. And the tensioner is what we want to focus on for now. We need to pull that tensioner to free up the belt so we can take it off at least one of these pulleys here. Now we're gonna zoom in a little bit, take a good look at this tensioner, and you'll notice on this end of the tensioner is a 1/2 inch opening, and we need to put a 1/2 inch, some kind of 1/2 inch tool. It can be a socket wrench, it can be a breaker bar. It can be the special tool to do this job. And you can see that this is the tool that I'm using right here, but it doesn't have to be this. You don't have to go out and buy a new one of these. I'm not going to link you to any tools to go buy. If you have a 1/2 inch drive ratchet, you can use that and maybe put a little pipe on the end of it so you can get more leverage and turn them. We need to turn this counterclockwise, and that will loosen up all the tension on this belt. And why we have it loosened up like that, we need to take the belt off at least one of these pulleys, and now there will be no more tension on that alternator, and we can unbolt that and take it right off. With that tool comes with an extension, another big long extension, but I found that this 3/8 ratchet fits right in the hole at the end of that tool and makes it a breeze to unloosen this belt, which you can see I'm taking off this pulley with my right hand. And there you go, this belt is loose. And now we can unbolt the alternator and get it out of there. And as you can see here, I just leave the belt hanging right there. It's not going to go anywhere, it's no big deal. And we can easily get the alternator out now. And if you need to change a belt, I mean, now's the time to change your belt. And if you forget how it goes back on, there should be a schematic sticker right on the front of your car, and I'll show you where that is right now. The sticker's right on that plastic shroud right as you pop the hood. And yours, if you're working on a 3.3 or 3.8, yours is right here. And if this is all worn out on your car, just get on the internet and do a search for belt path for 3.3 Chrysler or 3.8 Chrysler. The path is the same. These alternator bolts are 15 millimeter, all three of them, and they're all the same length, so you don't have to worry about getting them mixed up. And there's one up underneath. It's a little difficult to see, but just poke around up there and you'll find it. And this last one is a really strange location if you ask me, but it's right where the screwdriver is tapping right there. And first we have to clean off all the dirt just to get to it without slipping off, and we don't want to strip anything. And it'll make your life a little bit easier if you just pop this spark plug wire off and give you a little more room, and you'll be able to see a little bit better. And you might have to use a wrench on this because of these lines right here tend to get in the way of a ratchet. And again, these are 15 millimeter bolts. And now that the old one is out, you should compare it with the new one that they sold you and make sure they sold you the right one. It should look exactly the same. And here's something that's really important, guys. You want to put the alternator and the EGR valve on at the same time. And with the new alternator, you just want to get one bolt started and just leave the alternator loose. And this way you shouldn't have any problems getting the bolts onto the EGR valve. If you go ahead and tighten up this alternator all the way and then go ahead and put the belt on and then do the EGR valve at the end, chances are very, very good that you're not going to have enough room to get that bottom EGR valve bolt on. It's going to hit the alternator. And then you're going to have to take the belt back off and loosen up the alternator again and get the EGR valve on again. But just get the bolt started on the EGR valve. And this way you can move that out of the way a little bit to get to that bottom, that bolt, that funny, weird positioned bolt in the front of the alternator. And once you get the valve tightened and the top two bolts on the alternator tightened, it's time to go back up under the car and tighten that last alternator bolt. And then it's time to put the belt back onto all the pulleys, make sure that's all aligned and tight. And at that point, all that's left is to hook up the alternator wires, the EGR wires. Don't forget to reconnect that spark plug wire. And then you're going to move on to the last step, which is reconnecting the battery. And you can see me here pulling on the tensioner and turning it counterclockwise. It's not really turning though. And that's being done with my left hand or my left arm while my right hand is reconnecting the belt. And there it is. Now we're reinstalling the rock shroud, and then we're moving on to electric connections. And don't forget the alternator wires. I'm pretty sure it's 13mm on this nut right here. And the connector that goes onto this alternator, it's going to wiggle around a little bit after it's tight. It's supposed to be like that, so don't go forcing any nuts and breaking anything. Just all you have to do is snug it down.